It's the summer of 1995, and Bill Gates is missing. Not missing like disappeared, the world's most powerful CEO, running a company worth billions. For 1 week, twice a year, he steps outside the normal machinery of Microsoft. No meetings, no visitors, no normal office noise. Just a cabin on a lake in the Pacific Northwest, stacks of internal papers, and a caretaker who brings him 2 simple meals a day. He calls it Think Week. On one of these weeks, in 1995, after days of reading internal papers and thinking through where technology was heading, Gates came back with a memo of his own. He called it the Internet Tidal Wave, and it helped accelerate one of the biggest strategic pivots in Microsoft's history. 1 person, 1 week. And a memo that helped pull Microsoft into the Internet age. So what actually happened in that cabin? Cal Newport has an answer, and it's the entire argument of his book, Deep Work. Newport's claim is simple, but it cuts against how most of us actually work. The ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task, what he calls deep work, is becoming one of the rarest and most valuable skills in the economy. Not because the work itself changed, because almost everything around it did. Newport points to research on how the average knowledge worker actually spends their day. More than 60% of the work week lost to electronic communication and searching for information. Nearly 30% of the entire week swallowed by email alone. Multiply that across a career, and most people spend decades reacting instead of producing, answering, forwarding, checking, never actually building anything that requires their full mind. Which is exactly why Gates's cabin worked. Strip away every channel of shallow interruption, and what's left is raw cognitive horsepower, pointed at one problem for as long as it takes. A calendar can be packed for 40 hours a week and still contain almost no uninterrupted thinking. The founders and operators who figure out how to protect real thinking time, not manage it, protect it, end up producing work the rest of the market simply can't compete with. It's not that they're smarter, it's that they're among the few people still using their brain the way it's built to be used. Here's the uncomfortable part. Even when you finally sit down to do the real work, some of you is still somewhere else. Newport leans on research from the psychologist Sophie Leroy to explain why. When you switch from one task to another, say, checking a Slack message before returning to a proposal you're writing, your brain doesn't fully switch with you. A portion of your attention stays locked on the thing you just left, still trying to resolve it. Leroy called this attention residue. And it doesn't clear the moment you look away. It lingers, quietly working against your performance on whatever you turn to next. Now stack that. A notification here, a quick email check there, a glance at a group chat. None of it feels like a big deal in the moment, but each one leaves behind a little residue. By the time you finally open the document you actually need to write, you're not bringing your full brain to it. You're bringing whatever's left after a dozen tiny departures. This is why a distracted 8-hour day can produce less real output than a focused 90 minutes. It's not a motivation problem, it's a residue problem. And it means the real cost of checking your phone during a work session isn't the 30 seconds you spent on it. It's the cognitive drag that can remain after the phone is already back on the desk. Newport's answer isn't more willpower. It's building an environment where residue never gets the chance to build up in the first place. And the strangest example in the whole book comes from a man who solved this problem almost a century before smartphones existed. In the 1920s, Carl Jung was one of the busiest men in psychology. A full patient schedule in Zurich, lectures, correspondence, the whole machinery of a growing movement built around his name. And it was slowly draining the one thing his actual breakthroughs depended on, uninterrupted thought. So he built himself a tower, literally with his own hands, stone by stone, on the shore of a lake outside the city. A retreat called Bollingen. No electricity, no telephone. He chopped his own wood and cooked his own food, and while he was there, the normal machinery of his Zurich life couldn't reach him. It was inside that tower, cut off completely, that Jung did the thinking that shaped some of his most important work on the unconscious mind. Thinking that never could have survived a Zurich office full of ringing phones and waiting patients. Newport calls this the bimodal philosophy of deep work. You don't try to sprinkle a little focus into every day. You carve your time into two distinct modes, deep and shallow, and you protect the deep blocks like they're sacred. Jung did it across weeks. Newport describes other high performers doing it across single days or across a semester. One stretch of the calendar reserved for meetings and shallow obligations, another stretch reserved for nothing but the work that actually moves the needle. The lesson isn't that you need a stone tower. It's that depth doesn't survive by accident, wedged into the gaps of a calendar built for everything else. It survives because someone decided in advance exactly when the world is and isn't allowed in. Jung had weeks at a time to disappear into. Most people building a business don't. So what do you do when you can't take a season off, but you still need one specific piece of work done at a level your normal environment won't let you reach? Newport tells the story of Peter Shankman, an entrepreneur who'd signed a book contract and had 2 weeks to finish the entire manuscript. Every time he sat down at home or in his office, something pulled him away. So he did something that looks, on paper, completely irrational. He booked a business class ticket to Tokyo, round trip, no hotel, no real stay. He landed, cleared immigration, spent barely any time in Tokyo, and turned right back around for the flight home. What he was actually buying wasn't a trip. It was roughly 30 straight hours with no Wi-Fi, no phone signal, nowhere to be. And a plane ticket expensive enough that wasting the time would have physically hurt. He wrote the entire manuscript in the air, both directions. Newport calls this a grand gesture, spending real money or real effort on a dramatic change to your normal environment, to signal to your own brain that this block of work matters enough to protect completely. It sounds extreme. It is. That's the point. A gesture that costs you nothing doesn't convince your brain of anything. The investment is what makes the commitment real. You don't need a flight to Tokyo, but the underlying move is available to anyone. Book the hotel room for one night. Pay for the co-working space. Tell your team you're unreachable until Friday. Make the cost of backing out higher than the discomfort of finishing. Grand gestures solve depth for a single project. But Newport eventually pushes the argument beyond productivity altogether. It's about what happens when distraction stops being something you do and becomes the default setting of your life. Newport tells the story of the writer Baratunde Thurston. His friends called him the most connected man alive, tweeting constantly, always reachable, always responding, and he was exhausted by it in a way he couldn't quite name. So he unplugged. 25 days with no social media, no email. He expected the absence to feel strange, but by the end of the first week, it already felt surprisingly normal. He was less stressed about not knowing what was new. He talked to strangers, ate without documenting it, moved through ordinary moments without turning every experience into an update. Newport's point isn't that social media is evil or that you need to delete every app you own. It's that most people adopt these tools using what he calls the any benefit mindset. If it gives you anything at all, you keep it, no matter what it costs. Newport argues for the opposite. Treat your attention like a craftsman treats their tools. Only keep the ones that clearly serve what matters most to you, and cut the rest without guilt. Because the real cost of never training your attention isn't just lower output. It's losing the capacity to think a full thought, have a full conversation, or sit with a hard problem long enough to actually solve it. And that's not a productivity problem, that's a life problem. A cabin, a tower, a 30-hour round trip taken only to write, 25 days outside the feed. Different circumstances, same underlying discovery. That focus isn't something that happens to you when conditions are perfect. It's something you build deliberately, often at real cost, in a world that will happily take every uninterrupted minute you're willing to hand over. So here's the real question underneath all of it. Not, how do I get more done? But what would you actually build? Who would you actually become if you protected even a few hours a week the way Gates protected that cabin? Deep work goes a lot further than this, worth grabbing a copy. The most valuable hours of your week are probably still unclaimed. Hit subscribe for more of these.